am Vaibhav from Vaibhav E-Learning Academy. Today we are going to start a new topic in biology, that is anatomy of flowering plants. Today we will be discussing about anatomy, which is the internal structure of flowering plants, which are the angiosperms. We will be discussing about the internal structure of our day-to-day plants which we see. So, if we are starting morphology, in morphology what we discuss? In morphology we discuss about the structure of external organs. External structure we discuss in morphology. But in anatomy we have to discuss the internal structure of any organism. So discussing the internal structure, we have to start from the simplest thing, and the simplest thing is the cell. But here in anatomy of big plants, which are like big structures, big organisms, large organisms, we won't be considering cell. Mostly we will be considering a group of cell, and a group of cell is called tissue. So in the anatomy, the most important thing is tissues. And what are tissues? So we have to write the definition. What are tissues? A group of cells, structurally and functionally similar, are called tissues. So, a group of cells which are structurally and functionally similar are called tissues. So, what are these tissues? So, as we know, a group of cells is called a tissues. So, we have discussed before that a group of cells is called a tissues. Then a group of tissues form an organ. A group of organ is called organism, and from organism it becomes to the a group of organ is called organ system, and from organ system it becomes organism. So now here we have the definition of the tissue. Now in flowering plants we have two main types of tissues. So let us see what are the two main types of tissues. So tissues are of two types in flowering plants. The first type are called meristematic tissues. Meristematic tissues. The second type are called permanent tissues. So, tissues are of two types. One type is called meristematic tissues and the other type are called permanent tissue. Now, what is the difference between meristematic tissues and permanent tissues? So, let us see. So, first we have meristematic tissues. Meristematic tissues are the tissues which are active. Active in the sense they can do cell division easily. These kinds of cells are actively dividing. So, the type of tissues or cells, because a group of cells is called tissues, which divide actively are called meristematic tissues. So, the type of tissues or cells which divide actively and continuously are called meristematic tissues. Now, what are permanent tissues? The type of tissues which are mature and they do not divide further. Are called permanent tissues. So the type of tissues or cells which divide actively and continuously are called meristematic tissues, and the type of cells which are mature and do not divide further are called permanent tissues. Now, from this word further, you can say that permanent tissues are made up of meristematic tissues. Meristematic tissues are the tissues which have the ability to divide, but after some period of time they are not able to divide more. They are not going to divide further. So that kind of cells become mature and they transform into the permanent tissues. Now, meristematic tissues has two types. So let us now discuss the types of each and every tissue. So the meristematic tissues has two types. One type is called the apical tissue. One is apical tissue, one is lateral tissue, and one is secondary tissue. So instead of tissues, here we will be using the word meristem. So in the meristematic tissues, the first type is axillary. But instead of axillary, we use here the word apical, not axillary. Apical. Apical meristems. Then we have lateral meristems, and then we have intercalary. So the meristematic tissues are of three types. One is called apical meristem, second is called lateral meristem, and third are called apical, lateral, and intercalary meristems. So here the most important thing is apical and intercalary. These two are called primary tissues. Primary tissues. And lateral tissue is called secondary. We will be discussing why these apical and intercalary are called primary and why the secondary is called the lateral is called secondary tissue. Then in permanent tissues, we have two types of permanent tissues. One is simple permanent tissue, and then we have complex. Now what are simple and complex? We will be discussing that. And after in simple, we have three types: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma are the types of simple permanent tissues. For complex permanent tissues, we have xylem and phloem. So this is the main flowchart from which we will be discussing the whole chapter of anatomy of flowering plants. So tissues are of two types. One is meristematic tissues and one is permanent tissues. Meristematic tissues are the tissues which actively divide. Permanent tissues are the tissues which have lost the ability to divide. Meristematic tissues are of three types: apical, lateral, and intercalary. Apical tissues are present in the tip, which is actually helps in increasing the length. Second is called lateral, which is actually in the secondary growth. It helps most in secondary growth. And third one, we have the intercalary. Intercalary is used for increasing the girth or the width of the plant. Then we have permanent tissues. In permanent tissues, we have simple and complex. What are simple tissues? So the types of tissues which have only one type, which is only one type of cells, are called simple tissues, and complex tissue are the types of tissues which have more than one type of cell. Their structure is similar, but the structure and functions are similar, but the shapes are different. And next we have in simple parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, and in complex we have xylem and phloem. So in today's video we will be discussing about the meristematic tissues. In that, what are apical, intercalary, and lateral meristem. We will be discussing about that. So let us see the first type, which is called the apical meristem. Let us see. So now we will be discussing what are apical tissues. Apical tissues are the tissues which are meristematic tissues. They divide continuously and they help in increasing the length of the plant. So let us write down the definition. The type of meristematic tissue. Meristematic tissues which help in increasing the length or height of the plant. length or height of the plant are called apical tissues or apical tissues. So the type of meristematic tissues which help in increasing the length or height of the plant are called apical tissues. So if you have to increase someone's height, you can increase in two ways. One way is by stretching them up and the second way is from the down. So in the plants there are two ways. If here we have a tree over here and then there are some roots over here. So we can increase the height of it by two ways. Either by providing apical meristems at the branch on the shoot part or on the root part. So that is why we can say that the apical meristems are of two types. One type is called shoot apical meristem and the second type is called root apical meristem. So they are of two types. So one type is shoot apical meristem. Shoot apical meristem, and the second type is called root apical meristem. So what are shoot apical meristem and root apical meristem? First one, shoot apical meristem and second root apical meristem. Shoot apical meristems are present in the shoot region. So for example, let us take from here, if there is a plant and here the shoot apical meristem will be present on the tip. So because it is apical, apical means on the tip, on the axil, on the top. So it is present over here. Slowly it keeps on growing like this. And then from here there are some lateral. So this thing, like the main shoot apical meristem keeps on going further. It keeps on going up. But there are some intercalary meristems over here, which intercalary meristem only help in bringing the leaf or bringing the flower or something. They are only responsible for the branches, leaves and flowers, and the apical meristem keeps on going up. This type of growing is controlled by shoot apical meristem, which is also a type of racemose type of inflorescence. In inflorescence, which comes in the morphology video. So in morphology, we will learn that there is one type of inflorescence which is called racemose inflorescence. In that, the axillary, which is axillary meristem, axillary bud keeps on growing up. Why? Due to the help of the apical tissues only. So this is the one way of growing. Second way is root apical meristem. So the shoot apical meristem, basically it can grow to very large height. But root apical meristem can't go that much deep into the soil. So it will be going just like this. So there are in the tip, here there are some root hairs. So root hairs are covered by a tip called root cap. Now the root cap is one thumb-like structure and here is the root hair and these are the root, for example. So the root cap covers the meristematic tissues. There are meristematic tissues which is called root apical meristem. It is present inside the root cap. That is why root cap is very important, because it helps in the growing of the roots in the deeper to the soil. If the root goes deeper inside the soil, they can get more nutrients, more water, more minerals from the soil. So that is why these root apical meristem are present in the bottom, in the tip of the root. So there are four regions of the root. The first region is called root hair. Second region is called root of meristematic activities. Root of meristematic activities have these root apical meristem. Third region is called region of elongation, which is present in the root. Elongation means it is elongating. And the last region is called region of maturation, which is present over here. Because in the starting, even here there were root caps. Here also it was continuously growing. Slowly it comes more down. So this region becomes mature. Now from this mature region, root hairs also come out. And root hairs, what are the function of root hairs? They help in transportation of water. They take the water molecules from the soil. So these are about the apical tissues. Now we will be discussing about the second type, which is called intercalary tissues. Let us see. So now we will be discussing about the second type of meristematic tissues, which are called the intercalary tissues. So the second type, which is intercalary tissues. Now what are intercalary tissues? So For intercalary tissues, we have to understand the structure of a plant. So for example, here, if we have a plant which is having the apical bud over here, and there are some leaves over here, then there are some flowers over here, something like this. But now what happens is, there are shoot apical meristems present on the tip. This tip keeps on growing to the top, and it makes this region mature. But in some, like after leaving some gap, they leave some space like this. Like this space, what is this space? This space is actually for the regions which are a little bit unmature, which is they are still meristematic region. So this shoot apical meristem keeps on growing up, but it leaves behind some spaces. That spaces contain meristematic cells. Then after these, in these spaces, what happens is slowly these develop into a branch, and then from the branch again more flowers come. Here also the same, this apical meristem, shoot apical meristem is present over here. This also keeps on growing. It leaves some space from which another branch comes out. So like this, slowly the tree becomes very large and branched. So the reason for the branching of the flowers, or the reason of the branching for the plant, is because of these intercalary tissues only. So the tissues which help in lateral means side growth of plants are called intercalary meristems. So the tissues which help in the lateral growth of plant are called intercalary meristem. So apical meristem help in increasing the length of the plant or height of the plant, and intercalary tissues or intercalary meristematic tissues help in increasing the breadth or girth. Breadth or girth of the plant. So this was the second type, which is called the intercalary tissues. Now we'll be moving on to the last type, which is called the secondary or lateral tissues. Let us see. So now we'll be discussing about the last type of meristematic tissue, which are called the secondary or lateral meristematic tissues. The last type, which is lateral meristematic tissues. Now, what are lateral meristematic tissues? So here, as I was saying in the first point, that the meristematic tissues, which are shoot apical meristems and root apical meristem, which is apical meristem, and the intercalary meristem, these are called the primary meristems, primary tissues. But now, these lateral meristematic tissues or secondary tissues are called as the secondary tissues. Like obviously, because lateral meristematic tissues is secondary tissue. Why are they called primary and why are these called secondary? So in the start, as we have discussed till now, here is the plant, here there are the apical meristem, and here the lateral meristem. No, not lateral meristem, the intercalary meristem. But this is just the primary growth. If you see in this figure, do you find any lateral meristem? No, because in the starting there is no use of lateral meristem. Once the plant grows to some certain size, after that secondary growth takes place. What is secondary growth? The primary growth was responsible for increasing little bit width and little bit of the size. Next, the secondary growth takes place. In the secondary growth, these lateral meristematic tissues take place, and lateral meristematic tissues consist of interfascicular cambium, cork cambium, and like what are cambium first of all? Here we have cambium. Cambiums are responsible for secondary growth. We will be learning about secondary growth in other videos. But here secondary growth means just increasing the, giving more protection first of all. We will be discussing this word protection, which is given by sclerenchymatous and parenchymatous tissues. This we will be discussing in the other videos. So meristematic tissues help in the secondary growth of the plant, and the secondary growth of the plant, it means providing it more functional mechanical support and providing it some thickness to the plant. So this is the function of lateral meristematic tissues. The lateral meristematic tissues have fascicular, vascular cambium and mostly cork cambium. Only these two are very important. So the type of tissues which help in secondary growth are called lateral meristematic tissues. Lateral meristematic tissues. Now here lateral meristematic tissues. Here we will have one example of cambium. Cork cambium, interfascicular, vascular cambium, and vascular cambium. Cork cambium, interfascicular vascular cambium, and vascular cambium. Interfascicular vascular cambium, we'll be discussing these things in the anatomy of roots, anatomy of stems, and then we have vascular cambium. So let me give you a brief information about what is a vascular cambium. So there is one bundle, this is called conjoint bundle, in which xylem and phloem are present. In between the xylem and phloem there is one layer like this. This is called cambium. Now what is the use of this cambium? After the primary growth of the plant is over, this cambium develops and which it helps in growth of the lateral meristematic tissues, which help in increasing the thickness, the size, and they help in giving the mechanical support to the plant. So these are the functions of the lateral meristematic tissues. So that is it for today. We have learned about the basic of what is anatomy. We have learned about what are the different types of tissues. We have drawn a flowchart, and today we have learned about what are meristematic tissues. We have discussed about 3 types of meristematic tissues, which is apical meristem, and second type is intercalary meristem, and the third type is the lateral meristem. So I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If you have enjoyed today's video, give it a like this video, give it a like button. You can smash the like button. Subscribe to this channel if you are new to this channel. Share this video to your friends if you find this informative. Press the bell icon to view more updated notifications. See you next time in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.